Hey everyone, I'm Jack.
And I'm Alex.
And today we'll be ranking the bosses of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy from worst to best. Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the weirdest examples of market failure in this generation of games, due to its release time, gameplay and trailers, and most importantly, developer, Eidos Montreal. Due to those three factors, it was compared en masse to fellow Eidos Montreal title Marvel's Avengers, a horribly disappointing game that lost a grand total of $63 million from its repetitive, uninventive gameplay and uninspired narrative. In turn, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy performed well below expectation and, as many bad games do, was put on Xbox Game Pass and PS Plus less than a year after release.
All of that leading us to say this game being as good as it was quite a shock. While not without some issues on the older generation console ports, namely with the sound design and graphical fidelity, the PS5 version more or less removes all of these problems, resulting in one of the best superhero games ever. Is it on the levels of Spider-Man and Arkham? Well, no. However, what Guardians of the Galaxy accomplishes is the creation of a brilliantly structured narrative making each Guardian equally important, and fun gameplay making full use of each of the Guardians' unique personalities and combat traits. As one of the most fun games of 2021, Guardians of the Galaxy also features a decent lineup of bosses, and we're excited to rank them. With that said, let's fucking get into it.
For a fight that looks as good as the Magus does, it is a damn shame this isn't even a boss. Yeah, you run into a giant inflatable ball to avoid an attack so grand in scale you can't even see what it is, but realistically this is nothing more than the caves on Lamentus blown up in proportion because it's the endgame. I'd say that almost without competition this is the most visually appealing boss fight I've ever gone through, however that's just about the only positive notion I'll hand the Magus. The ending was extremely forced and predictable. They attempted to fool you by rolling pseudo-credits until, in a shocking twist, Adam Warlock became consumed with the Magus, although the dialogue choices pre-fight are also fairly comedic, par for the course. Beyond that, however, it's generic action sequences with enemy overcompensation, a good time to use Star-Lord's Eye of the Hurricane. The ending quicktime was neat in that all of the Guardians came together in their own way to defeat the Magus, however, still for this to be the only true interaction with a boss in their own fight is intrinsically a problem with the design itself. Clearly I didn't dislike the Magus, it's simply here out of disappointment resulting from both its grandiose and build-up over the course of the endgame.
Damn. We really put this here out of spite to prove a point that Magus is just that bad. Ouch.
Stepin Thanos arrives as one of the worst designs of a grounded comic supervillain ever. This looks fucking horrible. Nonetheless, this fight is a gimmick taking place within Drax's mind. This entire Drax sequence was a fever dream to begin with, climaxing in a way with an encounter with infinite Mad Titans, who, like Anakin hidden within the confines of Darth Vader's persona, is Drax's weakest mental link. Thanos killed Drax's wife and daughters, so to continue into the depths of his mind, you need to let yourself die and accept the past instead of vehemently grieving on it, a good and applicable message for life in general. However, this is not a self-exploration seminar, nor a good boss fight whatsoever.
We had a little debate while making this video on whether these things count as bosses or not, and decided that they pretty much aren't, but this video would be like 10 seconds long if we only counted the big bads, so here we are. Like most bosses in this game, the Slake Beasts aren't particularly unique and exist as meaty targets for you to unload ice rounds into. You're effectively controlling 5 people, so the result of the widely split aggro is rarely having to do anything other than hold R2 and strafe in a circle. It's not unpleasant, but the only significant difference between them and a normal enemy is the tanky health bar and lack of significant numbers to throw against you. It's only a mini-boss, so it's not like they were trying to go all out with these two, but I'd expect some degree of depth beyond holding the same 2 buttons for 2 minutes, you know.
I found the reveal of the Universal Church of Truth's priests actually being combat-oriented robots extremely cool. With many different colors and variants, the Inquisitors still felt somewhat neat even after however many dozen encounters you face between chapters 8 and 14, but still the combat across the entire game is near indiscernible from one another in terms of any enemy/mini-boss fights. Inquisitors feature a bit of attack variety in lasers, ground slams, and even stunning other Guardians until you heal them. As well, they have 2 health bars. In certain cases, you can even remove an arm in a mid-HP transition, taking out certain attacks from their movesets. While somewhat interesting, Inquisitors eventually become a bore resulting from the repetitive movesets and extremely girthy health pools.
I was never any good at Star Fox, but fortunately for me, this outer space showdown is a good deal easier than Andros. The ship combat was a fun minigame, and I was glad they gave us the chance to use it in a boss fight, simple as it may be. If you saved Rocket's weapons instead of the llama, I'm told you get to use those here as well, which I'm sure is cool even though I didn't myself have access to them. Slowly taking down his ship's weak points and evading his mines is fun in an arcade game sort of way, sort of reminds me of playing the Jurassic Park rail shooter they had in my local bowling alley. Gamora's mockery may be a bit too on the money to elevate this encounter to greatness, but it's a nice break from the usual repetitive gameplay, which is enough to beat out a good half of the other offerings.
The multiverse in Marvel Comics is both a detrimental and fantastic creation, although just focusing on the positive, it allows for the Dweller in Darkness to be a cross-dimensional, multi-universal embodiment of the collective fears of humanity in one, while in another, a famed beast of Lady Hellbenders. It's worth noting that this spot marks a serious ramp-up in boss quality, as all before were either enemies or mini-bosses. That said, the Dweller in Darkness is a fairly repetitive and cyclical boss consisting of 3 different phases, each generally the same. Alex and I had polar opposite experiences with the Dweller in Darkness. I felt like a genius upon realizing Rocket's cluster flark bomb is how you damage the Dweller almost immediately, while Alex spent 30 or so minutes writhing in frustration over the admittedly hard to realize mechanic. For the first 2 phases, Rocket's ability is only useful when the Dweller slams the ground. Time slows to half when you open the ability menu, giving you ample time, but it's still tight and you need to usually place the bomb as the beast slams the ground. While extremely cinematic, the main issue with the Dweller in Darkness is its reliance on enemies in between its own combat segments that from here on out no other boss features. Although, when the Dweller does eventually rejoin the fight, it's quite intense. Once you bomb his arm, it opens up to all the Guardians, and wailing on it to where you freeze it in the Jello pool and Gamora slices it off was beyond satisfying. Once armless, the floating quadriplegic, which is actually spelled quadriplegic, I wrote it out as quadriplegic, shifts from its arms to its head. I recently saw a video of some girl launch an apple, like a whole apple, out of her vagina, and this is sorta similar, I guess. While the Dweller continues to shoot out Jacko-Gels, hey, you place a flark bomb in his head and he drops to the floor conveniently. This phase takes at most a minute or 2 due simply to his quasi-gigantic health bar. You actually just need to QTE him once and then damage his head a tiny bit, opening up to the closing cinematic. Killing the Dweller in Darkness was badass to the definition, and makes for one of the most enjoyable moments throughout the entire game, even with its extremely early appearance.
These 2 fuck-ugly scrotum heads have a really interesting mechanic that I've never seen before in another game. That alone brings them pretty high up the rankings for me, since novelty is few and far between these days now that so much stuff has been done already. The idea is you gotta keep them separated in order to damage them, which is a good idea anyways in a gank boss, but absolutely mandatory here. Over time, you begin to feel hopeless playing as Star-Lord alone, and it becomes more and more manageable as your allies funnel in. Well, except for Rocket and Groot anyways, because Rocket is still in his insufferable cocksucker phase that made me wish friendly fire was an option for the first 50% of the game's runtime. Eventually, the fight just ends for some reason, I assume courtesy of Cosmo. This weird way to cap it off makes it a bit unclear what the trigger is for beating them and if the damage is even relevant or if you're playing against the clock. Anticlimactic as all hell, but for what it's worth, they found a neat idea and I had an alright time with it.
Gold is a color I've always been marveled by. My grandma had a huge collection of fool's gold and real gold, and I'd spend hours simply staring in awe. I still actually have a 24 karat gold quarter somewhere in my house, although I don't know what happened to it, to be honest. Nonetheless, to call Grand Unifier Raker one of my favorite looking bosses of all time would be the understatement of the history of mankind. Gold as a theme for the Universal Church was a fantastic choice, and Raker's character design is second to none. Following that, how does his fight hold up? well, really well. While repetitive, it's extremely dynamic and features more attack variety than any other boss in the game. The only thing lacking is grandeur, ironically enough. More specifically, grandeur in size, due to the generally small arena and requirement for you to be as close as possible to Raker to deal damage. The fight feels confined, although truthfully, that's my only gripe with it. What it lacks in scope, it holds in cinematic lighting, story implications, and overall setting. Raker becoming an uber-powerful god before your own eyes was extremely cool and felt to me as a sort of inverse Darth Vader suit moment. Having to slog through rounds of church priests was a pain in the ass admittedly, although past that, Raker is simply a blast. The majority of his challenge comes in his ridiculous speed. I actually died but was saved by Groot's rebirthing ability and managed to win from there, but for reference, I barely died at all throughout the entire game, especially in the catered to victory bosses. Raker's main gimmick is his faith-infused shield that takes minutes to whittle down. Once broken, you take out an entire health bar, although he has 4 individual bars to make up his total health. His faith-based moveset consists of vision-impairing attacks and overall flashy moves consistent with the church's naturally awesome faith energy. Saving Nikki from the corrupted grasp of Grand Unifier Raker made for one of the best story moments of any, topped off by Raker's plan succeeding through Nikki's escaping of the Magus.
Fin Fang Foom is an awesome fucking name. Very catchy. Reminds me of the Foo Far Fo Fum thing the Giant and Jack and the Beanstalk says, which might be intentional for all I know. I dig his design, although I kinda wish they kept the weirder look from the comics where his mouth looks like one of those sucky fish you see on the edges of fish tanks. Hard to explain, you either know what I'm talking about or you don't, but this fight was really the only one other than Raker that I consider particularly noteworthy, although that phrasing sounds a bit more negative than I'd like. The icy flooring was fun, which is a sentence I never thought I would utter in relation to a video game. A lot of the time all I did in the way of dodging was slide around like a figure skater for 10 or so seconds, and it was strangely entertaining. Similarly to the Dweller in Darkness, I wasn't quite sure what was going on a lot of the time and if I was even damaging him or not, but I just sort of kept at it and took the triangle button prompts whenever they popped up and it worked out. While we're on the subject, I'd like to amend Jack's prior statement that it took me 30 minutes to figure out the Dweller in Darkness. I feel like I had to have clocked in under 15 despite my confusion. I hope anyways, that'd be pretty embarrassing otherwise. But back to Foom, he definitely feels like the coolest boss to me with all the foreshadowing of fighting him early on in the game and the sheer size of the creature. For taking the simple hold R2 till it dies combat and molding it into something engaging and satisfying, Fin Fang Foom is my favorite boss in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. Guardians of the Galaxy is easily one of my favorite superhero games, and I seriously hope we get a sequel one day, although prospects are dim seeing as Eidos has cut off any possibility of additional DLC. Also, I'm glad I got to play this game for free, no complaints, and otherwise, remember to like, subscribe, and watch our other superhero rankings of Arkham and Marvel Spider-Man plus Miles Morales if you'd like. That's all for now. Deuces.